I think the answer to the question of why a city like London needs greater control over its own finances are twofold, really. One is that, it's easy to forget, but London is an incredibly productive place which pays substantially more in taxation than is spent here. That's something that people who live in London, and indeed the South East and the East, where this is also true, broadly accept. It is part of what makes the UK what it is. Indeed, it's, the reverse of it is what makes the Eurozone what it currently is. So, there's a good reason for resources moving around the United Kingdom, and London is a very important part of making the UK's overall tax take what it is. However, London's needs are different from those of the UK as a whole. So if you live in London, you will just get more easily that the city needs infrastructure. It needs railways and roads and the other things that make it possible to get about. You will have a different view about housing, by far the most currently important issue of this kind. You will simply know, because it's clear to people that you meet every day, that housing and building housing and more housing is itself an issue. Now, the median or average voter who lives in, I make it up, nothing against them, Lincolnshire, will have different interests. So if a city like London cannot control its own resources, decisions will be made in good faith by ministers who are doing it in good faith and their officials, which suit the median or average voter less than the voters of London. And actually, it would be true in rural areas as well. So there's a good argument for having decisions about the way resources are used nearer to the people who not only understand, i.e. the voters who understand what's necessary, but politicians who have directly to respond to them. And to answer your second part of the question, the London Finance Commission, which reported in May 2013, it would be naive to pretend that we'd cracked open the Treasury and the tax-raising powers were being handed to London. Though Manchester, if it leads to Manchester getting more powers, then that's very good in my book. But I mean, all I can say is that, as we run into mayoral election campaign season, many of the candidates in all parties are taking these issues seriously, and I think their parties will have to.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony. And I suppose that the question for everyone to understand is, how is the progress that's being made in Manchester currently or in other northern cities, is that part of the negotiations that London's involved with, or is it something else? Because we had a few comments earlier about that.
Well, I think we can't get away with the fact that Manchester has its own and unique and robust political system that it's built at some level in the, it was partly in the ruins of the Labour Party's regional policy, which didn't get very far, and actually city regions now seem to be the future. They're the best we've got for non-central government units. And of course, London was the original prototype, created actually back in the 60s, but recreated in 2000. And so I think that what's going on in Manchester is important and interesting because it's captured George Osborne, the Chancellor's imagination. We live in a very centralised country, and you have to be pragmatic. If we live in a centralised country, we have to give central government what it wants, to the point when it believes that what it's doing is good for London or good for Manchester as well. And they have convinced, the Manchester political elite have convinced the Chancellor of that. I think he's right to take that view. And London and Manchester and the other cities now work together more harmoniously than at any time for years. There's a real effort to do that, to the point that rural and county England feels it's being left out. That would never have been thought to be possible in the past. So I think that London has to, in my view, act as a cheerleader for what's going on in Greater Manchester and other northern cities, and then say, we can do this, and probably better, or at least as well.